Welcome and thank you for being here today. Through the B.U.I.L.D.S project, we have partnered with 4 stakeholder partners who will be conducting a 4-part webinar series. This video serves as a self-paced learning tool, providing B.U.I.L.D.S organizations with educational content in an easy-to-find and consumable format on topics related to strengthening their organizational and service capacity in the settlement sector. Diversity recognizes that our work takes place on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Semiahmoo, the Katsi, the Coquitlam, Kwantlen, Kaikia, Musqueam, and Tawasin First Nations. The knowledge, traditions, and ongoing contributions of these communities are significant in providing context to the work we do, and diversity recognizes the importance that reconciliation has in building truly inclusive and strong communities. The B.U.I.L.D.S project is funded by Immigration, Refugees, and Citizenship Canada, and we are grateful to IRCC for supporting this important work in the settlement sector. We are honored to have Muhi Bakini lead today's session. He will be presenting on equity, diversity, and inclusion in relation to BIPOC-led grassroots organizations. Following Muhi's presentation, he has provided resources for further reading that will be included in a resource guide. Once again, I want to thank you for coming, and without further ado, the presentation will begin.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in for this session, which I titled Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for BIPOC Grassroots Organization. My name is Muhi Bakini. I wear multiple hats, but for the purpose of this content, the hat that I'm wearing this morning is of an independent equity, diversity, and inclusion consultant. So I'm presenting my own views based on my experience and perspective on the issues of diversity, inclusion, and equity. I titled the presentation Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion for BIPOC Grassroots Organizations, but also this is applicable to non-BIPOC organization, but the focus is just on BIPOC-led employers and organization and employees and staff. I would like to begin with a land acknowledgement by recognizing that I live, work, and play in the unceded ancestral and traditional land of the Asolo people, which locally in Abbotsford includes the Sumac and the Matsqui, and also the Nooksack nations. When I share a land acknowledgement, of course, like many of you, I'm also, I feel a deep sense of gratitude because I know that the land present our communities with a lot of opportunities that manifest in the fact that the land is invested, but also is used to extract resources that benefits our nations economically. And the land also is allocated for property development, providing housing and shelter for all of us. But in the process of acquiring significant land, which is about 89% of the land in Canada is owned by the federal government. Here in British Columbia, 94% of the land is owned by the provincial government. This mass acquisition of the land dispossesses Indigenous peoples who are historically constituted to be land-based people. And this is not just simple dispossessions. It has consequences, cultural consequences on their ways of living, Indigenous peoples' ways of living, culturally and materially, but also it has consequences on the environment. And the consequence of that, as we are seeing, a lot of ecological degradation that is happening. So when Indigenous people talk about land back, they want the relationship between them and the land to be restored so that they can practice the stewardship and caretaking taking that they have been historically been doing to protect the land and the environment, and for that matter, all of us. So I'm conflicted in my feelings, being grateful, but at the same time, feel a deep sense of guilt because this dispossessing of indigenous people should have an end in the immediate future. And I'm committed to be an ally for indigenous people, to fight for increased share of the land and to support the land back movement. The objective for these sessions are, in my view, very straightforward. I'm not going to tell you you should have an EDI approach for your organizations or when you're seeking employment, but I'm actually going to help you, or at least provide a perspective as to how valuable would the consideration of equity, diversity, and inclusion be for you personally, for the organizations that you have built or planning to build, or the employment that you want to be a part of. We're also going to have a new conceptualization of anti-racism and decolonization. We're going to explore ways to strategize for collective organizing and also create organizations that are informed by a strong vision and values. What is racism? Reverend Tandeka actually gives us a very unique perspective and take on what racism is. She says we must not forget that white racism was from the start a vehicle for classicism. Its primary goal was not to elevate a race, but to denigrate a class. White racism was thus a means to an end, and the end was the defense of Virginia's class structure and the further subjugation of the poor of all race and colors. I think this is important because sometimes we do not take the time to examine what racism is trying to conceal. In essence, racism is an economic project like colonialism, but it focuses on the politics of difference, pitting different racial groups and cultural groups against each other in order to conceal that economic project, which is driving extreme inequalities and create a legacy of oppression and exploitations. So this take on racism actually helps unmask the true intention of racism, which is in essence an economic project. But before racism was constructed as a theory to conceal the economic project that it advocates for, colonialism was invented. Unlike racism, colonialism is about seizing the indigenous land. And I know in the previous sessions, there was a conversation around the concept of terra nullius, which regard any land that is not occupied by Christians, especially white Christians, to be an empty land. But sometimes that is a bit of a mental gymnastics, because before a land was considered empty, people who occupied the land were considered empty of humanity. So the justification is started by depicting indigenous people as savages, which dehumanizes them and empties them from their humanity. And that justifies why the land is considered empty, because those who are on the land, they're not truly human. So colonialism seizes indigenous land, and then racism creates and designate and denigrate a working class groups that consist of exploited groups and individuals of all colors and all race in order to benefit the colonizers and the capitalist class. So it's really important to understand this twin process of racism and colonialism and how they both support and sustain this economic project. But what is the implication of colonialism and racism seen through this new lens to like a BIPAC-led organization or a BIPAC workforce? I think in my view, this shows us that employment and entrepreneurial and enterprising initiatives led by BIPAC members is going to face institutional and systemic challenges because we are supposed to be a part of that exploited working class group. And any efforts to advance to the higher class, the capitalist class that involves employment and entrepreneurship is going to be faced with significant resistance. Another insight that we can take from the new conceptualization of racism and colonialism is to understand that racism seeks to conceal this inequality and exploitation by pivoting indigenous peoples, people of intersectional identities against each other in the hope of concealing this inequality and deny opportunities. And when we know that, then we know our best chances is in our ability to collectively organize in order to access the different levers of power, which will ultimately enable all the marginalized and the exploited and the oppressed to access the economic empowerment and economic opportunities, which is the only means by which racism can end, because remember, it is an economic project and it needs an economic solution. But how can we collectively organize? So the logic of collective organizing actually is not necessarily in favor of BIPAC groups or individuals, because the logic of collective organizing says private interests, like the capitalist interests, are concentrated in the hand of very few individuals or groups. And because of that, it is easier for private interests to collectively organize. In comparison, public interest, collective interest, which includes the BIPAC's interest, is diffused. Like you have multiple groups that need to organize, to collectively organize to dismantle this structure of oppression and racism. Because it is very diffuse, it is also hard to organize. So when different oppressed groups, marginalized groups, groups that are facing economic inequalities, when they fight for victimizations, they risk losing the ground that helps them actually unite and collectively organize. So it's better not to argue over who is victimized the most, but to organize all the victims of these capitalist and exploitative structures. So now I think the difference between racism and anti-racism becomes really very clear, in as much as racism seeks to conceal inequality, and anti-racism frameworks reveals that and says, hey, we know the true intention of racism, which is to hide inequality. And it is, in essence, an economic project that exploits people of diverse backgrounds, including BIPAC members. And for that matter, an anti-racism framework suggests an inclusive and equitable alternative to the present structure. So, as I explained earlier, BIPAC organization must not assume that they have monopoly over victimizations, because these exploitations that is resultant of the capitalist system creates significant vulnerabilities. We see vulnerabilities across the spectrum, ranging from employment precarity, housing vulnerabilities, access to health care. These are all direct effects of the unequitable distribution of economic wealth, which is the direct result of racism and marginalization. So there is a significant interest for BIPAC members and BIPAC-led organizations and all the marginalized groups within a society to collectively organize to end these exploitations and inequality. And the best way to do this is through the concept of intersectionality, a concept that was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, an African-American legal scholar. Intersectionality is one of the concepts that are widely misused because it ends up being just about groups or individuals' multiple identities. But in essence, and according to Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality, she said, is not primarily about identity. It is about how structures make certain identities a vehicle for vulnerabilities. So I have mentioned earlier all the vulnerabilities that we are seeing now in our societies, including employment, housing, and healthcare vulnerabilities. For a BIPAC organization to increase accessibilities to opportunities and services, they would need to consider how individuals and groups' identities make them increasingly vulnerable. So let us say, for example, we create employment opportunities for both women and men in the view of Kimberly Crenshaw. She saw in the like industrial employments that were created in the U.S. That most of the jobs that were, for example, created for women ended up being accessible only for white women, and jobs that were created for Black people in Black neighborhood being only available for Black men. So you can see the intersectional nature of being a woman and being Black made those opportunities not accessible for this demographic. So whenever we are considering interventions, being it housing intervention, employment intervention, access to healthcare, we need to see how these structures, these opportunities that we are considering might or might not increase vulnerabilities for people of diverse background. So let's say if you're a BIPAC member and you want to create an organization, being it a not-for-profit or just a simple company. Given the context that I explained, the exploitative context, which is driven by extreme inequality and marginalizations, a BIPAC serving and led organization would need to have a very clear vision, a vision that provides a better alternative for what exists in the present in a given society, but also to have a very clear mission as to how this alternative, equitable, and just vision can come about. But most importantly, we'll need to articulate certain values that helps your organizations to achieve both the vision and the mission. But before we, as organization builders and creators, before we consider what instrumental or functional values to have for our organizations, I want to introduce you to 5 different categories from which we can select our values in a way that makes our organization encompassing of all the values. So the first category, I call it the category of difference. So basically, you need to have values that celebrate difference and diversity within your organization. Such values includes diversity, inclusion, equity, individuality, autonomy, and independence. And the second category, I call them the category of sameness, which is the opposite of difference. So this can include values like equality, community, collectivity, solidarity, coalition, and social change. And you will notice values from these categories can be really instrumental in helping your organization collectively organizing by inviting and organizing all the victimized groups and individuals to face the systems of oppression and inequalities as a coalition, as a group. The third category includes, is a category for competence or simply just abilities, right? Because you need a skillful workforce in order for you to achieve the vision and your organization mission. So this includes excellence, creativity, thoughtfulness, hardworking, soft skills, language, emotional competence and abilities, and cultural intelligence. You can see I'm trying to include both like hard competence and soft competence as well, because both aspects of this competence can be really instrumental in helping your organization realize its vision. And then at the end of the day, we are humans. We are not just defined by our immediate needs. We need to transcend, we need to have values that transcend our physicalities. And this includes compassion, empathy, humanity, and even things like enthusiasm, the ability to see the positive in the negative. But of course, the mother of all these categories is the category of leadership, or the accountability and responsibility and wisdom. All these values mean nothing if there's no an accountability and responsibility mechanism that makes sure all these categories, all these values are implemented and followed through. So let's spend some moments here talking about different types of the values of diversity, especially for people who are business minded. The tendency is to instrumentalize diversity, to just talk about how useful is diversity, or having a diverse force, how might that be useful in bringing about economic productivity. So I would like to just pause here a little bit and allow you this moment to just ponder what might be some non-material values or intrinsic values of diversity, regardless of what benefits we might reap from it. I would like to think societies that are tolerant and respectful about their diversity, they are peaceful, they are harmonious, and they are less polarized. They are united. You might not consider this as values, but these are the fundamental upon which um, robust economic projects are even built, right? No investor would want to invest in a society that is not peaceful and highly unpredictable or conflictual. So, in as much as this values of diversity can be seen as intrinsic, they also have some extrinsic or instrumental values to them. But also, some of the instrumental values of diversity can be found in that companies with greater diversity um, in their workforce, they're able to manage risk better. They're able to create better debates and better outcomes. But also, employees who work in in a diverse work setting, um, they are easily able to pivot and adopt new cognitive action because uh, we all know this. When a person who occupies a unique or different social locations voices a concern, you're most likely to legitimize that as opposed to a person who is similar. We consider that as just a matter of preference, but a person who is speaking from a different or unique social locations forces us to face our cognitive biases and take cognitive actions. Most importantly, companies with greater diversity uh, have been shown to achieve a 90% increase in innovation-related advantages. So the idea around the diversity advantages, which helps catalyze innovation and creativity, which is necessary for your organization to tap into in order to respond to present needs. Sometimes it's easier to appreciate the values of diversity. But when we flip the coin, what might be some of the consequences or wasted opportunities when diversity is not a consideration for your organization? So let's consider this. According to the to McKinsey report, if women are given the tools to achieve a maximum potential, they can add up to $12 trillion to global GDP. That means the world as we see right now is lacking 12 trillion simply because they have they have not appreciated the benefits that women as a demographic group can bring into the labor market and the contribution that they can make to the global economy, right? So this is a wasted opportunity simply because societies have not learned to appreciate and value competencies and skills that women can bring into the labor market, but also to societies in general. Or consider this, in the United States alone, the racial gap will cost $1.5 trillion by 2028. So in as much as racism would like to see Black people reduced into just a working exploited class, this is just in the United States alone, just creating that racial equity will bring about would bring to the United States financial coffers about 1.5 trillion just in the next 4 years. But these groups they face a lot of barriers when they want to access financial empowerment opportunities. As a BIPAC-led and BIPAC-serving organization, I'm saying these are opportunities that you can leverage and access. What are the some of the benefits of hiring immigrants, right? I know I talked a little bit about the concept of demographic diversity, like race, gender, sexual orientation. But there is also this concept of moral diversity, which is all about the lack of consensus on a moral issue. A moral issue can be something like an abortion, where people divide over if you're a pro-life or anti-abortion person. But moral diversity does not only occurs when an issue or a topic is morally controversial. We can take a topic that is as neutral as immigration. There is moral diversity on immigration. There's lack of consensus. Not everybody in this country thinks immigration is good for the country in terms of sustaining our population growth and economic growth. But they think actually immigration takes away from, there are people who morally disagree on this and think that immigration, bringing in immigrants, actually reduces that economic pie, and even its contribution to population growth might not be seen as desirable for many. But regardless of the disagreement, it is proven by research that, and especially for businesses and companies, immigrants bring considerable contribution to their working employment, workspaces and employment. So we are talking about one of the things that immigrants bring is cultural knowledge. And culture simply defined is all the capabilities and competencies that an individual acquires as a member of society. So imagine if you're a person who grew up in Africa or in India or in China or in Europe, in a society that is, and a culture that is uniquely different from Canada. And of course, there are significant cultural knowledge that you will accumulate. And when you choose to immigrate to Canada, you will bring all that cultural knowledge. It will be really counterproductive for your employer to think you are a liability, you are a disadvantage. Quite the opposite. Being able to live and be socialized in different cultures gives you that comparative advantage of having cultural knowledge that you can apply to a new culture that makes a person very innovative and creative. And also, people who are coming from diverse cultural background, they can expand the profit margin of their organizations by just allowing the companies that they work for to access broader markets. Earlier, I talked about the concept of diversity advantage, whereby people of diverse background can just, they're equipped to be innovative and creative, and also the cutting edge skills that they're able to develop based on the cultural knowledge, their ability to navigate their new cultural settings, and all the competencies that they develop in the process. So you can see there's a strong case to be made about the importance of diversity and why a BIPAC-led organization and BIPAC-serving organization can examine the wasted opportunities that were created thanks to the racial gap, gender gap, but just the sheer lack of diversity consideration in employment and in the economy as a whole. And if you would like to learn more about some of the concepts that I have introduced here, feel free to reach out to me, and I'm willing to to help you probably navigate some of the ideas that you're considering. But I would like to conclude by saying this. When we consider the values, especially the instrumental values, we shouldn't forget that values are culturally constructed. Values that we consider higher in Western societies might not necessarily be the same in other societies. But in this Canadian society, the mainstream culture has created a four-tiered hierarchies of values. The lowest tier of the values, and I know you would be so surprised to learn this, is actually the implementation tier, where we have frontline workers, people who are directly serving clients. Society, though this is the hardest tier to work on, society traditionally has devalued this. And if you pay close attention, you will see BIPAC members, racialized individuals, are disproportionately represented in the lower tier of values of implementation. And this has been made so clear in the pandemic, where those who are working in the health sector directly supporting patients and clients were racialized. And they bore the brunt of COVID, right? So as a BIPAC organization, you really need to consider who is overrepresented in this lower tier of value of the implementation. Who is more likely to be hired to be a frontline worker? And the next level of value is unification. This is basically for individuals who are managing people who are implementing, like those who are working at the lower levels. So society regards the unification level, the level of managers and supervisors as the second highest level. Of course, when you move from the implementation level to the unification level, you will see representation of BIPAC members declines. Though we have some levels of representation of BIPAC members there, but it's not significant. The highest level of value according to this society is communications. This is where you use the power of word, being it written or spoken, to create a value. I can tell you why this is a higher level of value, because it is really easier to duplicate and multiply words, right? You can create, let's say, for example, you can create a video that you can reshare 100 of times. You can write a book or a policy that can be used every time when this document, a video or an audio is being shared. You accrue a value from that. You don't have to physically be there every time to create that value. The fact that you're able to write something down or say something and record it helps you create a value. I'm not seeing a lot of BIPAC members represented at the communication level. And the highest level of values of all is the imagination level. So it is exactly what it suggests. So the imagination level is a level where you come up with images, pictures, visions that inform the values and all the programs, all the work of your organizations. And I'm submitting to you that at this high levels of imagination and creation, BIPAC members are not like represented the way they deserve. So as a BIPAC serving BIPAC-led organizations and leaders, you really need to critically examine the distribution of BIPAC members at all of these four tiers of values and see where BIPAC members are overrepresented and where they're underrepresented and why, and what hiring practices might be responsible for reproducing this kind of evaluation. Thank you so much. I hope this is helpful, and my contact is here. If you need further information, I would be an email or a phone call away from you. Thank you so much.